We've learned that government officials and countries are always looking for policies that are going to induce economic growth because they believe it's a very important indicator in order to raise the standard of living for its citizens. So it's not surprising that the governments themselves can influence economic growth by pursuing certain type of policies. So this section is going to be all about the government and the ways that they can induce economic growth. They can contribute to physical capital, human capital, technology. They can enforce contracts, protecting property rights, maintaining stable financial systems, and then finally promoting free and competitive markets. So our goal is to go ahead and open up each one of these categories right here just a little bit and give you a few examples of each. So let's go ahead and take a look at physical capital and private investment first. So physical capital and private investment. So this is one way that the government can induce economic growth by pursuing some type of physical capital and private investment. And when we talk about physical capital in this juncture, when the government provides some pieces of physical capital for the nation, we consider this to be infrastructure. Infrastructure. And infrastructure is essentially just the sort of public capital of a nation. So the public, there should be an E there. So the infrastructure is going to be the public capital of a nation. The public capital of a nation. So it belongs to the people, essentially. And infrastructure is going to make our lives, the citizens' lives, much simpler. We're very happy to have infrastructure because we would not be able to conduct our everyday economic activities without infrastructure. Infrastructure, of course, includes things like roads, so highways, local roads, interstate highways. We can take a look at dams, public parks. We can go ahead and say put the highways right here. So these are things that we as consumers, we as individuals within the country want, but this is where the government does step in and provide these goods for us. So we can consider this public infrastructure to be some type of public good as well. However, sometimes when the government doesn't want to provide the infrastructure themselves, they can incentivize private firms to do so. And how can they enact this type how can they incentivize these firms and corporations to do so? They can go ahead and take a look at some type of subsidies or tax incentives. So here, if the government themselves doesn't want to make the infrastructure themselves, they can hire out these private firms and corporations with tax incentives and subsidies. So tax incentives and subsidies. So these tax incentives and subsidies, the government will go to say, hey, to Amazon, I will give you this amount of tax rebates. I'll give you some type of subsidy if you build me this park right here or something along those lines. So here, one way that that the government can induce economic growth is by providing physical capital, the infrastructure themselves, or incentivizing private firms and corporations to do so with this type of private investment. So here, just not investment. Next, we take a look at human capital. So here, rule number 2 is through human capital. And remember that human capital is exactly trying to increase your education, knowledge, and skills. So what does the government provide to everybody should they choose to sort of take advantage of it? They offer free public education. Public education. All the way from kindergarten to 12th grade, all the way till you're a senior. So here, public education is one way to improve the human capital of the citizens. But suppose that you want to go ahead and improve your own education beyond high school. What else does the government provide? They provide a lot of grants and financial aid. Financial aid. A lot of us wouldn't be able to attend college or higher level learning if we didn't have some type of financial aid. So the government, they do provide scholarships, they do provide loans, very heavily subsidized loans. So here, you are able to get a very good education at a relatively low cost. And also tying everything together is once again going to be some type of technology. Technology. And technology is once again probably the most important role that the government is going to play because they also advance knowledge and invent products that enhance the standard of living for its citizens. So here, advancing knowledge and inventing products that enhance the lives of citizens. That enhance the lives of citizens. So here, the government themselves, they fund a lot of research products that are going to advance the type of knowledge that we have. Currently, we also have new products, new inventions, new processes, and the government paves the way for a lot of these type of things. A few examples, we can go ahead and put a few examples right here. We can take a look at NASA. So the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. What happens when we destroy planet Earth? We want to go ahead and see if there's going to be another inhabitable planet within our solar system that we can also destroy. So here, NASA, the government does fund a lot of money into NASA itself, and that is going to be, once again, a part of technology. Something a little bit closer to Florida and more relevant for us is NOAA, so the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. They're the ones that track all the tropical weather, and we can have a very nice life if we know that hurricanes are going to be coming, and we can prepare for that. So here, if any inclement weather comes our way, we have NOAA for that, and once again, that's going to be researched and given a lot of funds by the government. An example that they actually provide you in the slides is Los Alamos National Park. Los Alamos National Lab, not park, National Lab. And the Los Alamos National Lab, this is where we started on the beginnings of the Manhattan Project. So what happens when you split an atom? Very bad things happen, and this is where we got the fission and the nuclear bomb sort of started off, and we noticed that this is going to be advancing technology as well. So 3 things on our first sort of bullet point right here. We have physical capital and private investment, human capital, and technology. But there are other ways that the government can induce economic growth as well, just by having some type of good institutions. We have enforcement of contracts. Enforcement of contracts. So enforcement of contracts, basically we have some type of legal system where when a contract is signed, the parties are going to have to be bound by whatever the contract says. What would happen if one party could renege on a contract without any penalty at all? That would lead to some very disastrous results, because the vast majority of business nowadays is going to be conducted with some type of contract. So here we have to make sure that parties are going to follow along with what the contract says. Otherwise, all economic activity would be halted. So here we have some type of legal system where contracts are going to be enforced, unlike other areas where they don't have the legal system and have very poor institutions. Along this line, we're going to have protection of property rights. Protection of property rights. Property rights. With the introduction of with the protection of property rights, this will give people a very important incentive to continue to want to innovate in research and make new products and inventions. Basically, with property rights, we can have things like copyrights. We can have things like trademarks, patents. These are all going to be included under property rights. So put these examples right here. This will give us a good idea of exactly, once again, tying into the idea of good institutions with the legal system. If we were able to steal someone's sort of product or invention and profit off of it for ourselves, then we really wouldn't have any incentive to want to innovate at all. So these property rights, the copyrights, the patents, the trademarks, they give us a very important incentive to continue to want to innovate, make new technologies, make new innovations and processes. And once again, this is going to pave the way for economic growth. Along with this, not only do we have a stable legal system, we also have a very stable financial system. Stable financial system. So in the United States, we actually do have a very stable financial system. We don't go through crazy up and downs every single day. We know what inflation typically is going to be on a very sort of daily basis. We know that prices aren't going to fluctuate up and down. So by ensuring a stable financial system, we can go ahead and have a very good business transaction on a day-to-day basis. We don't really have to worry on our prices going to go up, our prices going to go down. Is the economy going to go up precipitously one day? Is going to tank the next? So here we know pretty much daily on a day-to-day basis what the financial system is going to do and provide for us. And the government plays a very big role with that. And then finally here, we can go ahead and go a bit internationally as well, where the US government is going to be seen as a promoter of free and competitive markets. Promoter of free and competitive markets. Competitive markets. So this just tells us that we in the United States still operate under the capitalist ideas, and we are operating under laissez-faire to an extent. Very little government intervention in this regard. So basically, we are free to choose the products that we want to sort of produce and sell in the marketplace, and the government really isn't going to get in the way of that. And this happens both domestically and also in an international basis as well. So one way that we can actually view these free and competitive markets is something with the idea of economic freedom. Economic freedom. And economic freedom is just the idea of exactly how free are we to be making our own business decisions. So formally, it's a measure used to gauge the ability of individuals, and or businesses, so or businesses right here, to make investment and production decisions. To make investment and production decisions freely. So do we have a lot of choice when it comes to business transactions, or do we not have a lot of choice? And economic freedom is just going to tie into this idea of the US government being a promoter of free and competitive markets. So domestically, we are able to open up our own businesses with very, very little red tape. And internationally, we can go ahead and say, what type of free trade do we promote? Do we have a lot of quotas? Do we have a lot of tariffs? So in the past, we didn't, but now it's probably relatively a little bit more. But in general, we do like to have very free and competitive markets. We do have a lot of economic freedom. And economic freedom is very important because we do see that countries that have the most economic freedom tend to do very well economically as well and have very high economic growth rates. So what countries do you think today have the most economic freedom? What countries do you expect them to be? So there is a measure out there. It's called the Index of Economic Freedom. And we can go ahead and take a look at exactly what countries are considered to be free and which ones are considered to be a little bit repressed. Not surprisingly, countries that are considered to be economically free are the countries that you see in Southeast Asia and also a lot of countries in Scandinavia as well. So a lot of Scandinavian and Norwegian countries. So Singapore, Hong Kong, New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland, they rank in the top 5 of economic freedom. Ireland is top 6, surprisingly, probably because they have a lot of potatoes and alcohol. But there's actually a lot of freedom to choose within these countries. You might think that the United States is the most economically free, but we only see it all the way down here. It ranks in the top 20. So I think this is position number 17. So with the countries that are ranked very economically free, according to the study, we typically do see that these countries are developed countries. They have very high GDP per capita, and typically they have high economic growth rates as well. What countries do you expect to see at the bottom of this list? Not surprisingly, it's going to be the repressed countries or the countries that are under planned or communist regimes. So North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, and also a lot of countries in Africa as well, where there's a lot of corruption. So here, these countries, they have very little choice in what they want to produce and what they want to do economically, and this is once again going to have an impact on their economic growth rates and GDP per capita as well. So there is some type of positive relationship here. The more free the country is, the higher the GDPs. The less free the country is, the more repressed they are, the lower the GDP is. So here we can go ahead and wrap up the rest of the chapter, basically by taking a look at by doing a recap of the role of the government. Maintaining a country's infrastructure does ensure efficient transport of goods and services. So once again, the government can do this themselves, or they can incentivize private firms and corporations to do so with some type of tax incentives or subsidies. Public colleges and universities enhance human capital at lower cost of students. So the US government also does subsidize a lot of public education at the elementary, high school, and university level. And then finally here, we notice that government research centers such as Los Alamos produce many new technologies and innovations. Remember, this is where we started off the Manhattan Project. Economic freedom and per capita GDP, once again, just hitting on the relationship between countries that are considered to be more free and their per capita GDP. If you are considered to be a repressed country, so like Cuba, North Korea, Venezuela, they typically have lower per capita GDPs, while countries that are considered free, on the other hand, they have higher GDP. So there is a very strong relationship, as we can see from this data right here. So in terms of chapter number 7, we talked about economic growth, one of the most important measures or macroeconomic measures that policymakers and government officials like to take a look at, and they want to induce economic growth because they do understand the idea that very small differences in economic growth can lead to very vast differences in the standard of living. It can essentially set countries off on two entirely different paths. We took a look at the rule of 70. We took a look at our factors of production, which one of our factors of production or resources were the most important driver of trade. And then we ended the chapter just by taking a look at the role of the government. So this will do it for us in terms of this particular chapter. We'll go ahead and start up our new chapter in the next video where we take a look at one of the more important macroeconomic models with aggregate expenditures. A little bit complex, but we'll break into all those details next time.